The rain pattered softly against the rust-covered roof of my 1972 Ford Pinto, but I remained dry in the back seat with a flashlight clenched between my teeth. The neon glow from the ancient motel sign cast everything in the car in a futuristic light, usually reserved for big Hollywood movies. I was in the middle of sketching out yet another person that I had met since I started my grand road trip about 6 months ago. Under normal circumstances, I would be sitting at a particle board desk, scribbling into my notebook under the soft glow of a desk lamp. But I had underestimated how far my savings from my crappy high school pizza job would get me. At first, the money went towards fixing up the car, which was a few years older than I was. Every cent went into it until I decided spending money on pot would be a better investment. Now I couldn't afford the $50 a night that places like this charged for a room. I had been trying to get my writing seen by some people, but with no luck. If something didn't come through soon, I don't know how much longer I could keep living this way. I'd only ever get to camp in one parking lot for a few days at a time, and then without fail I would hear the same rhythmic tapping on the window. I swear that the police were coached on how to handle these situations. They all panned out as a carefully scripted play that I was never given the lines to. "Good evening," they always said in the same cadence, muscle memory of the vocal cords that spread department-wide. They'd tell me that it wasn't safe to sleep in my car, and that I never knew who could happen by and find me alone. When they picked up on my apathy, it could go one of two ways. They would either tell me I needed to leave or ask me if I had a place to stay. No matter what version of the script they used, it always ended the same way, with me having to find a new spot to stay at 2 in the morning. After a few weeks of this routine, I started figuring out what spots worked and which ones wouldn't. Hotels quickly became my favorite, the fancy chain ones especially. Sure, a room was never less than $75 a night, but the continental breakfast was free. I didn't need a room key for the powdered eggs and undercooked pancakes, and usually I was able to camp out there for a few nights longer as well. When you're homeless, you adapt quickly to your new normal. You have to. If you spend too much time worrying about your looks or making your car seat more comfortable at night, you won't make it very far. I lived like this for almost 3 months, filling out one job application after another, only to trash most of them when I realized that I wouldn't get to live out my dream aspirations. I should admit that this was all at least partially by choice. I could have aimed the Pinto up I-75 and been home in a day at most. My family wouldn't have been happy to hear how I had been spending my now endless summer vacation, but I would have a warm bed every night. The last they had heard, I had dropped out to write the next great American novel. That was true for the most part. I had had my sights set on writing since I was little. It was the only subject that I could ever bring home a high grade in. From there, being an English major didn't seem like a no-brainer if it weren't for the fact that I was never able to sit still for more than a few minutes at a time. With a flashlight clamped in my jaws and aimed at my cracking and bruised composition notebook, I scribbled down different ideas that I had had in the day. Everything from quotes to story ideas to people that I met along the way. I had never been good at creating new people from scratch. Entirely new personalities, clothing styles, and facial features, it just didn't come naturally to me. Every short story that I wrote was filled with people that I had met on my road trip. Every time that I would get another rejection slip from a magazine, the characters were always something that they chose to highlight as a strong suit. A backhanded compliment if there ever was one. I was in the middle of plotting out a new character. He was someone that I had seen somewhere before but couldn't place him. He was homeless, I remembered that much. His blonde hair had turned to a greasy light brown from all the sun and the lack of washing. He had some sort of tattoo under one of his eyes, but I couldn't remember which one. From memory, I had had his broken nose down almost perfectly. The subtle way that the bridge was raised and shifted to the left was like it had never been set properly. For a portrait in leaky blue ink, it looked good by my standards. I had moved the notebook farther away from me to admire my handiwork when I heard that familiar rhythmic sound layered atop the soft pattering of the rain that was still falling. Somebody was at the window. I jumped in my seat and clamped my jaw hard enough around the metal barrel of the flashlight to almost chip several teeth. Normally after 2 in the morning, the police stopped knocking on windows and resolved to let people like me sleep before their tapping became our morning alarm. I took the flashlight and shut it off, allowing tears to well up in my eyes. I was never proud of using this newfound skill, but if it kept me in one place for even a few more hours, then it was worth it. I pulled my shirt down another inch in case the tears blended in too much with the rain. This tactic never had a high success rate, but every so often I would get lucky enough to be approached by a guy who happens to have an old crusher girlfriend that I remind him of, and I'm allowed to stay for the night. The flashlight darted back and forth around the car and up and down my body, and it blinded me every time it reached my eyes. I grabbed a hold of the crank and I lowered the window, shielding my eyes with my free hand as droplets began to pour into the car, soaking the already damaged seats. "You can't stay here, ma'am," an older voice called from beyond the cone of light. The voice was of a man who had tried to quit smoking several times throughout his life. "Oh, I'm so sorry, officer." I let my voice trail off, but before I could pick it back up again, he cut me off. "Officer, I'm not a cop, darling. You either gotta rent a room or find somewhere else to stay." He turned, a strain in his voice, and gestured towards the partially lit neon sign that proudly read "Motel" in big red block letters. I could see his face more clearly. A younger man than I had expected, but still at least in his mid-40s. Just under the hood of his rain slicker, I was able to catch a peek at the nicely groomed head of either black or brown hair. "Who are you?" I asked as he turned back to me. Last name's on the sign up there." He gestured again to the fading neon lettering, this time to the fragile cursive green lettering above the blocky "Motel" that read "Sir Lane." I relaxed a little as he continued to speak. "Name's Aaron. I'd like to get your name, but it's too cold right now. So I'm sorry, but you have to rent a room to stay here." He focused the flashlight back on my eyes again, drowning my vision in a thin layer of bright yellow and white as I felt my eyes dilating. I nodded before rolling up the window and crawling over the center console as gracefully as I could muster without giving him too much of a show. Plopping down in the driver's seat, I shoved the key into the ignition as I saw Aaron step back from the car in the rearview mirror. I turned the key and the engine began to whine and choke, trying in desperate gulps to inhale air, but nothing. I turned the key again for more of the same. Metallic spinning and sputtering filled my ears above the rain, but the engine still refused to start. I cussed as I slammed my hands into the steering wheel. My mind began to spiral as the gravity of being stuck hit me. He could call the cops. He could have me hauled off if I was unwilling or unable to leave on my own. Renting a room for the night was out of the question. I didn't need to look in my wallet to know how close I was to having to steal my next meal. There was a tap at the window again. I looked over and saw Aaron gesturing for me to roll down my window. It won't." My breathing quickened as my eyes began to well up. Real tears this time. Breathing became difficult and my shoulders became heavy. Before any tears could fall, he said something that I didn't quite understand, as if his voice was just out of focus. I tried to give him a look that would ask him to say that again, but he had already pulled an umbrella from the pocket of his slicker. He gestured towards the office as he opened it. I rolled up the window, grabbed my keys, and followed him inside. You could almost taste the difference in the air between the outside and the office. I could imagine the decades-old AC unit churning out the same recycled and stale air since the 50s, flavoring every ounce a little at a time with the special combination of Freon and mold over the years. Every time that I smelled air like this, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia for a place that I couldn't even pin down an origin for. No specific memories, only a thin veil of something that is forgotten with the second breath that forces you to become familiar with your surroundings. "Here's what I can do," he said, unzipping his rain slicker and tossing it onto the rack next to the door. "In my experience, a bed is a lot more comfortable than a car." He chuckled as he walked behind the counter and sat down at the wraparound oak desk that looked older than the building. "I'm sorry, I just don't have a lot of money right now. Things have been tight." The tears were gone for now, but my throat still had a catch in it. "We will see what we can do," he said, smiling before pulling out a large leather book, the front stained to be just as dark as the tabletop. In the center, a tiny yellow card with "Guess" printed was encased behind a small laminate. He flipped to a page bookmarked in the center. It was a long list of names and dates divided into columns and rows. He pointed to the final slot at the bottom of the page. "Sign here," he said, handing me a pen without looking. I took the pen and did as instructed, signing my name in the neatest handwriting that I could muster with my still damp and freezing hands. "For most people," he trailed off, looking at my name and then up at me. "Cassie, it's an even 55 a night, but given the circumstances, I'll give you the hypothetical employee discount," he said, smiling. I could see his face fully now. Brown eyes sat behind a pair of wire frame readers. His hair was black, easier to tell in the light, all surrounded by pale skin. Something bugged me about it. It wasn't the paper-white skin that shut-ins have, it was almost a sickly pale. I didn't have the confidence to ask, so I shelved it away in my mind as a trick of the damp lighting. I probably looked pale as well. "Well, how much is that going to set me back?" I asked, already reaching for the wallet in my back pocket. $19.75. If you got a 20, you can make my job easier," he said, laughing to himself. I pulled my wallet out and fished out the lone $20 bill surrounded by a couple of ones, and a 5 that I didn't even know I had, and I handed it to him. The cash register let out a satisfying mechanical sound with a ding. Aaron took my 20 and placed a quarter into my palm. "That's your birthday, isn't it?" I froze. I wasn't sure what he was talking about, but I didn't like the idea of a stranger knowing anything but my name. "I'm sorry." "1975, he asked, mirroring my puzzled look. "You're about 19 or so, ain't you?" "Something like that," I said, shoving the quarter into my pocket. "What room?" He turned around to face the large corkboard outfitted with several pegs and ran his hand across the dangling keys. "I'll put you in room 11, he said, snatching a key from a peg and handing it to me. It was a basic house key, silver metallic finish all the way around. At one end, a bright yellow plastic diamond with rounded edges was affixed with a cheap piece of wire. A stencil of the motel sign was stamped into the middle of the tag, along with a little free postage logo towards the bottom. The room was as dull as I had expected. The bed sheets were the same wilted white linen with an embroidered floral pattern that all of the cheap motels seemed to have. I ran my fingers across the bedspread and felt how warped the pattern had become over the years. One bleach heavy wash cycle after another does that over time. With no overhead light, a lone bedside lamp was my only light source. I plunked my dripping backpack onto the floor next to the bed and began to go through it, placing the 2 other changes of clothes that I had on top of the heater to let them dry overnight. I only hoped my engine would get the same treatment after the storm died down. I couldn't afford another night, and I was certain that my discount was a one-night-only sort of deal. Pressed against the opposite wall of the bed was a long sideboard table that matched the late 50s aesthetic of the motel. I had a hard time telling if it was a reproduction or if it had been sitting there since the motel had opened God knows how long ago. Instead of the standard black and white bunny ears box TV that most motels offer, an AM/FM radio sat instead. It was a modest wooden number with a mesh face, a couple of dials as well as a switch for AM or FM. I pressed the power button and a little red light on top glowed to life as static crackled from the speaker in a low hiss. I turned the channel dial up and down, only getting a few nondescript stations. With the interference from the storm, I couldn't make out if I was listening to the news or actual music. Eventually, after enough angling and turning, I finally found something that I could make out. There was a lot of static at first, but after a few more seconds of tuning and angling the radio, I could hear it. A song that I was at least somewhat familiar with, but could not remember the name of, belted through the speaker. The room was filled with an at least somewhat relaxing harmony. I turned the volume knob as loud as it would go and I walked to the bathroom in the back of the room. It was a section of around 10 or so square feet. It had a grimy fluorescent light that sputtered when I first hit the switch, filling the entire room in a dirty yellow tint. And 2 neatly pressed towels were stacked on the vinyl countertop that held the recessed, off-white porcelain sink. The shower was just as filthy as the rest of the bathroom. Mysterious brown and green stains were dotted across the opaque plastic shower curtain. The grout between the blue tile backsplash of the shower had turned to pink in most places. I cranked the handle and steaming hot water poured out of the shower head almost immediately. I peeled off my damp clothes and I climbed in. I listened as the first song faded out and a song that I did know took its place. A Horse with No Name. It was one of the first few songs that I ever learned by heart. One of my dad's favorites on the 4 mixtape cassettes that he always traveled with. Moments like this made me want to call and check up. Maybe ask how Lily was holding up without her big sister. But I knew that he wouldn't want to hear from me. I could only imagine what he would say if he could see the way that I was living. If I wasn't proud of it, words couldn't describe how disappointed he would be. He didn't even want to speak to me at first when I told him that I had filed the papers to drop out. After everything he had sacrificed to pay for tuition at what was supposed to be my dream school, I quit after just 1 year. I don't know if I would want to speak to me either if I were him. I don't know if that warm bed would be waiting for me if I went back after all. Maybe my little homeless experiment was permanent. The song didn't have the most creative lyrics, but I sang along with the radio anyways to drown out the thoughts of home as I scrubbed deep into my scalp. When I had finished my shower, I swiped what was left of these small sample bottles of shampoo and conditioner. I wrapped myself in one of the towels and scrubbed the steam off the mirror. The shower had turned my normally bright red bob into a tangled mess of deep crimson ropes that clung to my scalp like knotted tree limbs. I stepped out of the bathroom, a trail of steam following behind me with its wispy, translucent fingers. I turned the radio down, almost silent, and I checked out my clothes on the heater. All of them were still almost completely soaked through, aside from the only shirt with my high school's name across the chest, with the bright and gaudy letters and the school mascot on the front. The normally pale blue color had taken on a darker complexion from the rain, but it was dry enough. I threw it on and I crawled into bed. When my head hit the pillow, I listened to the radio now that the storm had swept the station far off in an unknown direction. Now it only let out a low hum and hiss. When it mixed with the sound of the rain on the brick and plexiglass windows, it made the softest and most relaxing noise that lulled me into a deep sleep in only a few moments. I don't know what time it was, but the rain was still pouring and daylight was still nowhere to be seen when the radio started screaming. It started quietly, almost a whisper, but it was just enough to rip me from my dreamless sleep into a state somewhere between awake and asleep. The static grew in volume and size like a large balloon inflating to fill the entire room, growing larger and larger with each passing second. I threw my hands over my ears, but that only worked for a moment. Soon enough, that balloon of horrible noise, a screeching mix of scraping and twisting metal and breaking glass, still broke through my hands, both slow and fast, seemingly existing outside of the laws of physical sound. I jumped from the bed as I felt my eardrums ache. The needle on the radio bounced wildly back and forth between channels as the incandescent backlight flickered on and off rapidly. I smashed the power button with a closed fist, but it refused to move. I tried again and then for a third time with no results. I felt something wet slowly drip down the side of my cheek. I tried to cover my ears again, but it had become even more futile in just the last few seconds. I pulled my hands away again to see them streaked and smeared with red. I was bleeding. I tried the volume dial next, but it was already at 0. I screamed at the top of my lungs, a mixture of cursing and animalistic wailing, ripping the radio from the wall and letting it fall to the ground. The wooden case fractured and split, but the noise continued. It sounds odd, but the only thing that filled me aside from confusion was dread. The same feeling I had when I broke my little sister's toys when I was younger. Only now, I don't know why. I stomped on it once, twice, 3 times. Maybe a few more after that, but it was all a haze through the pain. I forced my eyes shut while I tried to silence the symphony of millions of daggers flying around the room, only being caught by my eardrums. The wooden case broke even more. The splinters dug deep into the soft underside of my bare feet. When the noise stopped, I fell backward, sobbing from the ache that was left in my ears. My body started to shake as my shoulders began to heave up and down. Suddenly, I just wanted to be home. I was sorry for leaving and I wanted to be back. I wanted to fall at my dad's feet and cry. I wanted to apologize for reasons that I didn't know and things that I never did. Tapping. A light knocking at the front door jolted me from my tears. It was coming from the door. "Miss Matheson, is everything okay in there?" I heard Mr. Sterling call out from the other side of the door. I opened my eyes and the radio was gone. There were no more pieces on the ground and the splinters in my foot were gone. I touched my finger on my earlobe and the blood was no longer dripping down the side of my face. "I'm fine," I shouted back, my voice still clogged with tears. "Are you sure? I could hear you all the way down in the office. May I come in?" "No!" I shouted again. And then I heard it. Music, softly. I looked up and the radio was back on again, still tuned to 102.2. I couldn't make out the lyrics anymore, but there was a tune nonetheless. I heard the quiet steps of hard-soled shoes against concrete walking away from my door, only to fade into the sounds of the storm still raging. My hands began to shake as my eyes darted around the room. What the hell? I touched my ears again and there was still no blood to be found. The radio still hummed along in the background and I was finally able to focus on the music. A doo-wop number that I had never heard before. I tried to focus on the song as I studied my breathing. I did my best to trace back everywhere I had been since this morning. I listed every moment as if I were plotting out another rejected story until I came to a hitch. I didn't remember pulling into the lot. I had no memory of spotting the neon sign in the darkness. I couldn't even remember what highway I was off of. I was still sitting on the floor when the radio changed. No, not changed. Something chimed in. A voice. "Holy hell!" A man shouted over the music. "Can you hear me? Ma'am, I'm calling an ambulance. You hold on." The man's voice on the other end was frantic, almost out of breath, but it didn't sound like he had been running. He was panicking. I did my best to focus on his voice over the music, but it was no use. It was as if he had stepped away from whatever microphone he was speaking into. "I hope this isn't too much for you," a calm and steady voice from behind me said. A chill ran down my spine as the hairs on my arm stood on end. I whipped my head around and there was Mr. Sterling standing with his back against the door. I jumped to my feet and whirled around to face him. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, backing away to put as much distance between us as I could. "I'm sorry, I'm sure this is a little jarring for you. I do my best to make this as easy as possible," he asked, still as calm as could be. "A little jarring," I shouted. "Get out of my room." He stepped closer while I continued to shout at him. I kept backing away until I ran into the wall. I dug my heels into the carpet and pressed myself as flat as I could into the gaudy striped wallpaper. My eyes darted from the floor to the ceiling looking for something or anything that I could use to protect myself. "Please calm down. This will be easier for you if you just breathe," he said, still stepping towards me and raising a hand as he did so. "Don't touch me!" My cries fell on deaf ears as he continued to close the gap. He seized my wrist when he was in range, and I felt my body go numb as my eyes rolled into the back of my head. I felt almost weightless as I lost consciousness, slipping beneath the curtain of pure non-existence. A ring began to cry out in the blackness, growing louder with each passing second. As it did, a small white dot, no larger than a grain of sand, grew larger and larger until it encompassed my entire vision, blinding me to everything that I couldn't see. All at once, as quickly as it had started, it was gone. The ringing stopped in an instant, and as if someone had snapped their fingers, the bright white was replaced with aching darkness. I felt the wind against my bare arms and opened my eyes. I wasn't in the motel anymore. I wasn't even inside. The rain still poured, but I wasn't getting wet. I now stood on a lone stretch of road, staring at my little Pinto impaled by a guardrail. On the adjacent shoulder of the road, a semi-truck had veered into the ditch, its hazards blinking on and off. The road was streaked with many long and winding black skid marks. A man stood in the center pacing back and forth, every few seconds yelling something into the CB radio in the truck cab, doing his best to shout through the storm. I lost control of my breathing again and my legs soon followed. I collapsed onto the pavement. "I hate to tell you, but you can't wish this one away, Cassandra." Serling spoke from behind me as if he were able to tell what I was thinking. "Am I dead?" "Not yet, but you're on your way." He snapped his fingers and I was standing again, staring into the mangled mess of my driver's seat. Long streaks and splatters of deep red covered the shattered windshield. I was slumped over the steering wheel with a fractured piece of the guardrail piercing my stomach. The radio still on and tuned to 102.2 FM, desperately trying to play a doo-wop tune through broken speakers. Aaron said something, but I didn't register it. His voice was still calm though, as if he had walked hundreds of people through this exact scenario. My memory was coming back to me in pieces. I had the radio up to stay focused. I couldn't think. The rain was too heavy for me to see. I hit something, and then I was in the parking lot. How did I get there? "What happened?" I asked, still blanking on a few key details. "Knowing anything beyond that woman in the car being you only makes everything harder." Without another word, Serling placed his palm against my forehead, and I felt my eyes roll backward again. However, this time, instead of the sense of fear, a large wave of calm, almost euphoria washed over me. In less than a moment, we were back in my room, only now something was different. Something was gone. It took me a moment to realize the pattering of rain had ceased. Serling still stood in front of me, a slight grin across his face. "What happens now?" I asked. He didn't say a word. Instead, he held out his open palm that contained the keys to my Pinto and gestured towards my newly packed bag on the bed. I looked down and found that I was now dry and dressed in the clothes that I had come in with. I took the keys and bag and walked toward the door to the parking lot. Before I left, I fished the quarter from my pocket and held it in my hands, rolling it between my fingers for a moment. "And keep the change," I said as I turned to flip the quarter back to Serling, but he was gone. The coin landed on the carpet with a soft thud. My sneakers scraped on the now dry pavement as I walked to my car. I tossed my bag into the back and sat down in the driver's seat before sliding my key into the ignition. In one turn, it started right up, the engine humming nicely as if it had just rolled off the factory line. I pulled out of the lot and kept driving into the distance, watching as the neon sign faded into the background. As I drove, everything around me began to lose detail. Bushes stopped dotting the sides of the road, and eventually, the stars had vanished from the sky as it became pitch black. The surrounding countryside soon followed, and the Pinto's puny halogens tried to cut through the darkness to no avail. After a few more moments, the car itself began to fade from my vision until it was only me, alone in the darkness, neither floating nor standing, just simply existing. Eventually, my body faded as well, and I was plunged into pure yet comforting darkness. The last thing that crossed my mind before I found my destination was a single melancholic thought of home.